Hello students, Dr. Meyer here. Welcome to week 4. Our lesson this week is called Who is My Neighbor? And this week you are participating in a Servant Leadership Service Learning Project orientation. And so I want to welcome you to the orientation. That is the video you are currently watching. And I have a PowerPoint here I'm going to present as I share information about the Service Learning Project. So, as I said, our topic today is Who is my neighbor? And this is really an orientation to the Service Learning Project. So you are all aware by now that a major component of this course is the Servant Leadership Service Learning Project. And so today we're really going to give you an overview of the project, what it all entails, as well as some opportunities for you for your service. So I want to start off by saying there are some orientation goals in watching this video. First of all, I'm going to do this video in 2 parts. I'm going to try to break it up a little bit so that it's not so long. So the first part of the video, we are going to review what it means to be a servant leader. Secondly, we're going to examine our neighbors. So who are the neighbors of Mercy College? Well, as you know, Mercy College is located in downtown Des Moines, Iowa, and so we're going to explore a little bit about the neighborhood and who the neighbors are directly related to where the college campus is. And third, we're going to discover and understand who your own neighbor is through a community needs assessment assignment that you will be completing this week. That is part 1 of the orientation. Part 2 of the orientation, you will be explaining the SLSLP assignments, or I'll be explaining that to you. And then you're going to consider some project options of how you will do your service learning. And by the end of the orientation, you should have some ideas on your next steps so that you can get started with your project. And finally, we'll end the second part of the video with aspiring to be a servant leader and the opportunity for a Servant Leader Honor Court Award. Okay? So what does it mean to be a servant leader? Well, during the first week of the course, you completed a servant leadership pre-assessment questionnaire in which you assessed your skills in personal accountability as a servant leader, social accountability as a servant leader, and then community or national and global needs. And so when we think about servant leadership, one person that comes to mind for me is Martin Luther King Jr. Dr. King, had the statement, everybody can be great because anyone can serve. And that is true for all of us, especially as we strive to be servant leaders and we learn more about those 10 characteristics that Greenleaf discussed. We all can be servant leaders because we all can serve. Another servant leader we can aspire to be like is Jesus Christ. He is our master servant leader. He gave us examples to follow. He said, the greatest among you will be the servant of all. And in this slide here we see an image of Jesus washing his disciples' feet. Here's Jesus doing one of the lowliest of tasks to serve his people. And so we think about our Christian calling and our responsibility as servants and community leaders to really love our neighbors as ourselves, just like Jesus told us to do. And when we think about Jesus, Jesus says, who is your neighbor? And he says, anyone who is in need, anyone who is the most vulnerable. And so this week we're going to explore who are the most vulnerable in our community. When we think about the year 2020, we think about the pandemic, our current reality. And there's an aspiring servant leader by the name of Fred Rogers. You might know him from Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood if you ever watched that show on PBS. And he says, if you look for the helpers, you'll know there's hope. And so we're going to watch just a short video with Dr. Fred Rogers, and we'll think about hope.
My mother used to say a long time ago, whenever there would be any real catastrophe that was in the movies or on the air, she would say, always look for the helpers. There will always be helpers. Anybody who is coming into a place where there's a tragedy. If you look for the helpers, you'll know that there's hope.
And so, as Fred Rogers mentioned in that video, if you look for the helpers, you'll know that there is hope. And we've been called to be servant leaders in our community. We've been called to be hope for the most vulnerable. And there are so many circumstances going on in our world today, and even in our local communities, where we can be of help and of hope to others. And so that's what we're really going to strive through this week and throughout the remainder of the course. So let's get to know our neighbors. When we think about our community, we often think about our neighbors. Now you have neighbors just like I do, maybe on your street or in your apartment, wherever you might reside. But we want to talk about today our Mercy College neighbor. And so I want to introduce you to the Riverbend neighborhood of Des Moines. And what we're going to be doing this week, part of the lesson and part of your assignment, is to complete a windshield survey. And a windshield survey is simply just driving or walking or even using public transportation, going through a neighborhood and looking and observing the neighborhood or your neighbors, maybe your closest community. You can also do this virtually. And so today I'm going to take you through what I would call a virtual windshield survey of the Riverbend neighborhood in Des Moines, which is directly north of Mercy College. So in this slide, I'm showing you a map of Des Moines. And as you can see, if you live in the Des Moines area, this is downtown Des Moines. And right here, I'm highlighting Mercy Medical Center. That is the hospital right on 6th Avenue. And if you go south on 6th Avenue, if you follow my little cursor, right here is Mercy College. And so when we think about exploring our neighbors, well, the neighbors of Mercy College are right up 6th Avenue, past Mercy Medical Center into this Riverbend neighborhood. And so this is the location and what we're going to learn a little bit about today. So a little bit about the Riverbend neighborhood in Des Moines. Like I said, it's located less than 2 miles from the center of downtown Des Moines. It's just directly north of Mercy College across Interstate 235 in Des Moines. The Riverbend neighborhood is one of the oldest neighborhoods in the city of Des Moines. It is well known for its distinctive architecture. There are many houses in the Riverbend area that date back to the 1870s. And the Riverbend neighborhood has a diverse mix of families. And I've just taken a couple photos here that I pulled off of the internet when I did a what I would call a virtual windshield survey search. And if you were to drive on 6th Avenue and drive through the Riverbend neighborhood, you would see some of these images of these houses. And so this is what Riverbend looks like in present day. And just a few statistics from the Riverbend neighborhood. In the Riverbend neighborhood area, right north of Mercy College, 40.1% of the residents live below the poverty level. And that's with about a population of 1,248 people. Now, these statistics were taken from 2015, but if you compare that Riverbend percentage, 40.1% live below poverty, and you include the whole city of Des Moines, if you compare that neighborhood, in the city of Des Moines, there's 11.4% below poverty level. And then if you look even further out, in Iowa, 9.1% of residents live below the poverty level. So geographically, the Riverbend neighborhood is the highest level of poverty in the state of Iowa and the highest level of poverty in Des Moines. Here are some pictures of present-day Riverbend. And so even though it is one of the poorest parts of Des Moines and of Iowa, there actually some revitalization going on. But there certainly are houses and neighborhood businesses that need support, and there certainly are vulnerable people within our local community right here in Riverbend. Here are a few more pictures of houses in the neighborhood. And so if you can imagine yourself doing a windshield survey, either virtually or even driving through a community, you would be noting and documenting and writing down, not while you're driving, but you would be writing down and maybe taking photos or just keeping a memory in your mind of what the neighborhoods are like. And so here you can see a few more houses in the Riverbend neighborhood of present-day Riverbend. You can also see the bottom photo I talked about. There's also a lot of revitalization going on and a lot of people that are trying to support this neighborhood. This image is another, just a simple Google map of the Riverbend area. And what I want you to take away from this slide is when you're doing a windshield survey, part of that is also looking at schools, looking at businesses, looking for grocery stores, what sorts of businesses are available to community members. You'll see here in the Riverbend neighborhood, here is Moulton Elementary School. That is where most of those students attend school. There is a St. Vincent de Paul thrift store. Hope Ministries is in this neighborhood. There's also a Salvation Army right down 6th Avenue. You can see some markets, some grocery stores, some parks, green spaces. So when you're looking and doing a windshield survey, you want to make note of all those things. What sorts of things do these families have available in terms of businesses, grocery stores, school opportunities? So keep that in mind when you're doing your own windshield survey this week. Here are just a few examples of what I noticed when I did the windshield survey through the Riverbend neighborhood. Like I said, Moulton Elementary School is the main school. It's the Des Moines Public School that is located in the neighborhood. There's also a St. Vincent de Paul thrift store, and St. Vincent de Paul also operates an educational center as well as a food pantry. Hope Ministries is another opportunity or another place where families that are vulnerable can get help in this neighborhood. And then I also noted a lot of bus stops for transportation. DART in Des Moines stands for Des Moines Area Regional Transit. And so there's a lot of public transportation that residents in this neighborhood use. And so when we think of who are the helpers in this neighborhood in Riverbend? Who are the helpers for those most vulnerable people in the population of this neighborhood? Well, Riverbend has several. One thing I noticed is that there's a Salvation Army available. That also has a thrift store and a food pantry. CFUM is in the neighborhood, and CFUM stands for Children and Family Urban Movement. And this establishment is actually directly across from Moulton Elementary School, and so it provides before and after school care for children in the neighborhood. They also offer a supper club where anyone in the neighborhood can come for a hot meal, and that happens daily. Habitat for Humanity, these are all places in the neighborhood and in Des Moines that serve people, especially the most vulnerable. I mentioned DMARC Food Pantry before, and Catholic Charities is in downtown Des Moines. St. Vincent de Paul is on 6th Avenue, real close in proximity, right in the middle of Riverbend. And so these are some of the helpers, like Fred Rogers said in that video, who are the helpers? These are some examples. So now it's time for you to think about who is your neighbor? Who are your neighbors in your local community? And what needs do they have? Are they specific needs? Are they needs you can identify quickly? Maybe it's even a neighbor down the street or a neighbor in your apartment complex. Maybe it's an elderly person who needs support during the pandemic. Maybe it's a care center or facility where people are lonely because of the pandemic because they don't allow visitors. Maybe it's someone who has food needs or education needs. So what you're going to be doing is thinking with a servant leader lens of how you can support the most vulnerable in your community. And so that brings us to our assignment for this week. One of your assignments is to do a community needs assessment, and this assignment is worth 50 points. You can do this needs assessment in two different ways. First, you could do a windshield survey assessment, which is similar to what I just guided you through virtually. You can drive the neighborhood, you could walk a neighborhood, you could even take public transportation. And the other option is to do a needs assessment virtually. So instead of driving through a neighborhood, you could also do something virtually where you simply do Google searches and internet searches to discover the needs of the community or of your community. Once you decide which option you're going to choose, whether it's a windshield survey or the virtual needs survey, there's 7 steps. And these 7 steps are listed in the D2L Dropbox this week. And 7 steps of a windshield survey assessment are simply, number 1, you're going to choose your neighborhood. Choose the neighborhood or community you want to explore. And number 2, complete your chosen community. You're going to research the chosen community. And so in D2L, there's actually a document that explains the whole windshield survey. And at the last few pages is a community needs assessment worksheet. And it's going to ask you specific questions, things that you'll look for, like you'll look for schools, you'll look for grocery stores. You're going to just directly answer those questions in the document, which you're going to turn in later. As you're going through the neighborhood or doing that windshield survey, think about if there's any organizations that you could support or that you could serve during this semester. Then you're going to think about making a contact with that organization. And now, since we're in the middle of a pandemic, we are going to keep our options as virtual as possible, and I'll explain that later in the next video. But making contact with an organization simply can be a phone call or an email reaching out to say, hey, what needs do you have and can I do them virtually? It might be reaching out to St. Vincent de Paul or to a food pantry and asking the question, how can I support you? How can I do it virtually during this pandemic? So after you made a contact, then you're going to finish that needs assessment chart, and it's going to ask you some questions about what are you thinking in terms of service learning options. So step number 6 is consider the service objectives. So what are your goals? What do you want to accomplish? Maybe there are education needs in the neighborhood. Maybe there's food security needs in the neighborhood. So those would be examples of objectives that you're going to think about. And finally, you're going to submit that completed needs assessment worksheet on D2L. A reminder that that assignment is worth 50 points. It's a very important assignment, and I think it will really help you to understand the needs in your local community. And as a bonus, once you complete this needs assessment, the time that you spend either doing the virtual survey assessment or the actual windshield survey if you decide to drive or walk, that time that you've committed to that can be added to your service learning hours, up to 2 hours. So whether you spend an hour or 2 hours, know that that's going to go towards your 15 hours of service learning that's required this semester. Okay? Thanks for watching part 1. If you click on D2L, the second video will be available there as well. Thank you.